Already recording. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. We're so happy to see so many of you, so many names pop up. So this is a webinar style webinar, which means on Zoom you might be used to seeing your face, being able to have a microphone. With this style, it's just Rachel and I talking at you, but we can interact with you all in the chat and in the Q&A box. So folks have already introduced themselves. If you haven't and you'd like to let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from, we'd love to hear from you. But let's just review some quick Zoom notes. Please put questions that you'd like us to actually answer in the Q&A box. So you can see there's a chat box and there's a Q&A box. And if you would like us to actually go through and answer them during the Q&A portion, please put them in the Q&A box. If it's just like something fun that you'd like to share with the rest of the group, please put it in the chat box. And please note that when putting things in the chat, you can choose to send it to everyone attending or just to Rachel and me. And if you need closed captioning, please click on the box that says CC in the little toolbar below. The raise hand function doesn't do much since you don't have a microphone, but again, we'd love to hear from you in the chat and Q&A boxes. Let's get going. So before we begin, let's just introduce EcoCycle and myself and Rachel. So I'll start with EcoCycle. EcoCycle back in 1976 brought the first curbside recycling program to Boulder County via a grassroots movement of folks just like you and me. And this established one of the very first recycling programs in the country, as well as EcoCycle as an environmental nonprofit. So to this day, EcoCycle runs the Boulder County Recycling Center in partnership with Boulder County, and the CHARM, the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, in partnership with the City of Boulder. And in addition to that, we do a tremendous amount of zero waste education, advocacy, infrastructure, and as we'll really get into tonight, policy at the state, local, and national levels. So my name is Rosie Briggs. I'm the Public Education and Engagement Senior Manager here at EcoCycle. So that means that I do get to do a lot of interacting with you guys and bring you into these solutions that my amazing colleagues are working on. And Rachel, I'll introduce her because she has a lot of talking to do this evening, so I'll spare her some. But she has been with EcoCycle since 2019 in her role as Senior Policy and Research Associate. She researches trends and best practices in recycling, compost, and zero waste in order to support EcoCycle's education and advocacy work. Her work is focused on providing policy and program solutions at the community and state levels, as well as studying diversion access, trends, and scalable solutions across Boulder County and Colorado. Rachel has been very involved in the passage and implementation of multiple waste reduction and recycling bills in Colorado, including the Producer Responsibility for Recycling Act. Rachel is also the lead author of the annual State of Recycling and Composting in Colorado report, so she's a bit of a celeb, and co-author of the Municipal Compost Programs Toolkit. She's proud to be an active member of Recycle Colorado's Board of Directors and Greater Colorado Council, and a number of national groups working on extended producer responsibility and other zero waste topics. Rachel was born and raised in Boulder, and after college in Wisconsin, she returned to the Front Range, where she currently resides with her husband, kids, and cattle dog, Mutt. So Rachel, I'm really glad that all of you guys are getting to connect with her directly because she knows all the answers. And a lot of the time when I'm answering a question, it's actually coming from Rachel. So I'm really excited to have you here, Rachel. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with all of these folks. I will now turn it over to you so you can intro us into this exciting webinar.
All righty, thanks. And yeah, my husband took the cattle dog Mutt to his parents' house, so you don't have to hear her barking in the background. So welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. Producer responsibility is an important policy tool to help ensure equitable access to recycling. EcoCycle has been deeply involved in advocating for and implementing producer responsibility laws in Colorado, and I'm really excited and honored to talk to you tonight about Colorado's producer responsibility laws. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do a quick overview, get a few slides on what producer responsibility is in general. Then we're going to talk about the two laws that Colorado already has, and the law that is currently being heard in the legislature. Next slide.
So we'll get into questions at the end.
Oh yeah, we'll take questions at the end, and we'll take we might take some in the middle as well if there's some good ones in the Q&A. So producer responsibility, which you may have heard called extended producer responsibility, or sometimes referred to as EPR. It's all the same thing. It's a concept that has been around since the 1990s when laws in the EU established producer responsibility programs to improve recycling of packaging. Since then, the programs have been created around the world, focusing on the collection and responsible disposal or recycling, sometimes both, of products including household hazardous waste, carpets, mattresses, pharmaceuticals, paints, batteries, and many other materials. In the US, California has the most product stewardship laws with 11. Maine and Vermont each have 9, and Colorado, as I mentioned, has 2, and a third, hopefully, on its way with this legislative session. I borrowed this map from the Product Stewardship Institute, or PSI. PSI is one of several national and international groups working to advance producer responsibility laws. Our team at EcoCycle is excited to be engaging with these groups in efforts to learn from each other and to refine producer responsibility laws across the country to best meet their intended goals. I wanted to start with a little background before I dive into producer responsibility about how laws are often written. So as legislators and advocacy groups like EcoCycle start to look at laws to address identified issues, the first step is to look at other jurisdictions to see what laws have been implemented around that same topic. For laws that EcoCycle has been involved in drafting, we reach out to the groups that advocated for the laws and the groups that were involved in implementing them. Sometimes it's the same groups and sometimes it's different groups. We try to understand not only the language of the laws, but also why they were written the way they were written, and what the supporters and the opponents of those laws raised as important issues in their passage. We also like to learn what the folks who've implemented the laws, what they might change about their law if they could go back and make changes, and any unintended consequences that may have arisen as the laws were implemented. And then, of course, we also engage with local groups that will be impacted by the law here in Colorado so that we can understand the local context that may impact the writing or implementation of the law as we adopt it here. So this process allows us to learn from best models and to create some consistency between states or between jurisdictions if we're looking at local policies within Colorado. But it also allows us to evolve the language to best meet the goals that are specific to Colorado or the jurisdiction that we're working with, and to really beneficially impact the situation that we're trying to address. Next slide. So as I mentioned, producer responsibility is a policy concept. It aims to reduce waste and to reduce waste disposal costs for local governments and the public, increase convenience and accessibility of recycling programs, and to create incentives for producers to design more sustainable, less toxic, and more easily recyclable or reusable products or packaging. It does this by requiring producers to take responsibility for the end-of-life management of products, and evens the playing field between those producers that are already taking those proactive voluntary actions and those that are not. As we'll talk about in a minute, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing the recycling, but they are taking responsibility financially, usually. It also shifts the cost from consumers and governments to the producers who make the decisions about how their products are made, and thus how sustainable and recyclable their products are. The shift ensures that recycling systems have reliable funding sources rather than leaving their operations reliant on the impacts of wildly variable market fluctuation. Under a system without producer responsibility, recycling programs are generally reliant on funding from the sale of the commodities they make, so like the aluminum or the paper that they collect. Many recycling programs are also subsidized by local governments. So when commodity prices drop, programs either have to get larger subsidies from the government or reduce their services, or both. So some producer responsibility programs rely on funding from point of sale fees, meaning when you go and buy the product, you're also paying a fee. Some in other states use a combination of producer funds and government funding. We'll talk more about the funding of Colorado's programs in a minute. So if we want people to recycle, and we do, of course, we need to build systems that make it easy for them to do so. That means that people have to have easy access to recycling collections, like curbside collections for common recyclables and drop-off sites for other materials like batteries and mattresses. We also need to eliminate the fees that people must pay for recycling their materials, whether that's a fee to subscribe to a recycling service or a fee at a drop-off site. Producer responsibility programs make recycling easy, and it removes those cost barriers by covering the cost of recycling. So another key to producer responsibility is that the laws include structures for oversight and requirements for safety, as well as requirements for recycling access and other goals that the program must meet. They require producers to have a plan or create a plan to get that plan passed through a government agency, and then to report annually on their program success and how they will adapt their programs if they're not meeting the goals that have been laid out for them. Producer responsibility programs include requirements for education. Not only the producer responsibility organizations have to educate the producers who are going to be impacted and paying into the system, but they also have to educate the service providers who will be collecting and recycling the materials, as well as having pretty intense community outreach and education programs so that people understand the program that they're putting in place. So simply by creating systems for responsible end-of-life disposal, producer responsibility programs have positive environmental impacts due to the increase in materials that they collect for recycling and proper disposal. I keep mentioning proper disposal. The programs we have in Colorado really focus on recycling. Some EPR programs or producer responsibility programs are directed like at like mercury containing items, and sometimes the best disposal is just making sure that they're not thrown in people's landfills, but that they're collected and handled properly. So that's what I'm referring to when I mean proper disposal. Some producer responsibility programs also include financial incentives for producers to design more sustainable products or reduce toxins in their products. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about our packaging law. Okay, so this is a very busy slide. There's a lot of players involved in producer responsibility programs, and I'm going to talk through this slide, and then I'm going to pause for Rosie to raise up any of the questions that are in the QA about just a general overview of producer responsibility. So starting from the left of the slide, we have the producers or brand owners. These are the businesses that are making the products that are covered in the law and putting those onto the market usually in the state or provinces, because there are some producer responsibility laws that are at a national level, such as in the EU. And so as an example, in Colorado's packaging law, if you bought a doll online, the producer of that doll's packaging would be the company that made the doll and has their logo on the doll's box. The online retailer would be the producer of the shipping package or the outer mailing box that it came in. So there'd be two producers in that instance, and both would pay into the program. In Colorado's producer responsibility law for packaging, there are exceptions for small producers, those that put less than 1 ton of packaging on the market every year, and those that have less than $5 million in gross revenue. So we're really talking about the producers that make the most packaging and put that into our markets. Producers have to join a stewardship organization, which is also often called a producer responsibility organization, sometimes called a PRO or PRO. They pay dues to the PRO based on the amount of product they put on the market. And in the case of the packaging law, it's the amount and type, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If a producer does not want to join the PRO, they often may follow the requirements of the law on their own, basically acting like a PRO themselves. So moving to the middle of the slide here, the producer responsibility organization is generally a nonprofit organization, not always, but generally, which has been formed by producers to implement the law. They create the plan for implementation, and once it's been approved by the state agency that's overseeing them, they work with service providers to ensure that the product is collected and recycled and that the goals of the law were met. They are responsible for reporting to the state annually on how well their program is working. The PRO is generally required to reimburse the state for all of the state's costs to administer the program. This means that the producer responsibility program, at least the ones in Colorado, provides services to residents without the state actually having to fund the program. That's pretty important, so that our state is not funding these programs, they are being reimbursed by the producer responsibility organizations. So we're moving to the upper right of the slide. So the state agency, which in Colorado is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, also called CDPHE, that's the agency that oversees the program and enforces it. They approve the producer responsibility organization's plan, and they ensure that the producers and the pro comply with the law. In the case of Colorado's packaging law, there's also a state-appointed advisory board. This board is necessary because of the complexity of the system being created to cover the many materials involved in the program and to fill in the gaps in infrastructure in much of our state. You think about all the types of packaging that we use that are all covered under this law. That's a very complex system. And so this advisory board, which is made of 13 experts, they represent the recycling industry, local governments, businesses that used recycled packaging materials, retailers, community environmental justice groups, both urban and rural Colorado are represented on the board. And these advisory board members consult with both the PRO and with the state in the development of the needs assessment, which we'll talk about in a minute, as well as the creation of the implementation plan and the annual reports, which will be forthcoming once the program is rolled out. So moving down to the bottom right, the groups that are doing the actual collecting and recycling of the product, these are groups like local governments that run collection programs, or the waste and recycling haulers and drop-off sites that collect the materials. This might be household hazardous materials facilities or material recovery facilities, sometimes called MRFs, like the Boulder County Recycling Center, that sort and process the materials. In producer responsibility programs, the PRO usually contracts with these entities and pays them for the costs incurred in collecting and processing the materials. Service providers are often, or another group that falls into the service provider category would be any groups that do education. So a group like EcoCycle that does community outreach and education could also be contracting with the producer responsibility organization to help them reach their education requirements. So advocacy groups like EcoCycle are very active in this process at a few points. EcoCycle is obviously a recycling service provider, down in the bottom blue circles. Since we haul recycling and compost for businesses, we're the contracted operator of the county-owned Boulder County Recycling Center. We collect materials at the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, or CHARM. And like I mentioned, we do extensive recycling education. We also are actively engaged in opportunities for public comment with the PRO and with the state and the advisory board. Sometimes we provide comment on our own, and sometimes we work with other groups in Colorado and actually national groups to submit feedback on behalf of multiple entities. Okay, so I'm going to pause. Rosie, are there any questions that have been asked so far?
There are lots of good questions. I think some of them definitely I know we'll cover in some upcoming slides, but so we just went over this model, but could you reiterate what happens? So the question is, doesn't PR also generate some revenue for more waste reduction efforts? Like, we'll talk about how it's being applied, but
does it generate revenue for more waste reduction efforts? I'm not sure that I'm totally understanding. There are different jurisdictions, producer responsibility bills are written different ways. I can't think which state it is, but I've definitely seen laws where like litter cleanup is covered as one of the expenses that the producer responsibility organization has to pay for. So there are, with laws, every jurisdiction's law is just a little bit different, at least. Some of them are very different. But definitely litter cleanup and other specific waste reduction could be written into it as well. Not sure if I got that one.
Yeah, so like in Colorado, we'll talk more about how this is connected to funding recycling, for
Yeah.
example. So, okay, Sherry, let us know if your whole question doesn't get answered. But okay, this is a specific one about number one clamshells. This person's saying their MRF doesn't want them. This will be included in the Colorado bill that we talk about. But Rachel, do you want to say anything specific about that?
I'm going to hold off on that one until we get to the materials.
Okay, cool. What is the impact of big changes at the federal level on our local laws and activities? That might be a good one to save for later as well. Eric says, does this affect only in-state producers or all producers?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to take the one you skipped as well, just a little bit.
Okay.
There have been efforts to pass some national producer responsibility laws. While those are great efforts, how recycling is implemented in different states varies dramatically. In some states, the municipalities are required to have recycling. In other states like ours, there's open market recycling in the majority of municipalities, meaning residents have to contract with their own service providers. So to have a federal requirement for EPR would be very difficult unless it was just that, requiring that states had to do something along those lines. So that one. And then the question about what producers, that is a great question. That this refers to any producer that is putting materials on the market within the state. So whether you are located in Colorado or you're somewhere else and you're selling material into Colorado, you're impacted by this. It is looking at the materials you are selling here. So if you're a Colorado company and you're selling a majority of whatever you're making into, say, Nebraska, that doesn't count against the Colorado, the amount of material that you're paying for in the Colorado system. If I used a different example, if you were selling it into, say, Oregon, that does have a producer responsibility law for packaging, you would have to be accountable for your products and packaging going into Oregon, but that wouldn't count against what you're paying into in Colorado. So it's all based on the materials going into the market in this state.
Very cool. Jennifer says recycling is important, but shouldn't producers work on the better packaging that uses less single-use plastics in the first place? Is this being addressed? So we will talk about how this incentivizes reduction overall for sure. Are there penalties or disincentives for paper packaging that is not made to maximize its recyclability? So for example, shiny plastic coated paper board that could be made without the plastic coating. Again, Rachel, that'll be kind of part of it,
yeah,
right?
Anything with products, we'll hopefully get there.
Okay, cool. So folks are asking just about some EPR trends. So are other states adopting this? Are they following Colorado's models? Who's kind of leading?
That's a great question. I just before I logged on here was looking at a review of all the EPR laws that are being run in various different state legislatures, and there are a ton this year on all sorts of different products. The packaging law, I'm not sure if we're going to cover this later, but I'll say it now. We were the third state to adopt producer responsibility for packaging. There are now 5 states that have a producer responsibility for packaging, and there's a number that are either doing needs assessments right now, or they are running bills to hopefully adopt producer responsibility for packaging. And the battery bill that I'm going to talk about later, we actually used a bill that was passed originally in Washington and then in Illinois and now here. And the battery industry said that there's currently 20 EPR laws being run on batteries. So yeah, there's a huge trend in adopting producer responsibility laws for lots of different materials.
Is any one state kind of the furthest along, Rachel?
On
in terms of passing and like having implemented and seeing some of the results of this?
So there's a lot of states
overall
that have implemented. What's that?
There you go.
There's a lot of states that have implemented producer responsibility for various materials. As far as packaging, we all kind of have different deadlines. I'll get to that when I get down to the packaging part. So maybe should we slide through the rest and then we can come back to question?
Yes, I think most of these will be addressed. I think the only one, like as we go through it, talking about, we had a question about the PRO being optional, and how if people are opting out of being part of the PRO, and then just I know you'll talk about the fees, the concern that the fees will be just passed on to consumers, because I know that's been really well fleshed out.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for these
All right.
great questions, folks. We'll try to just tackle them as we go, and I'm gonna let Rachel talk again.
Okay. All right. And I think some of our friends from Paint Care might be on the call. So if they are and people have really specific questions about Paint Care, I'm going to defer to them later. But Paint Care, well, producer responsibility for architectural paint is Colorado's first producer responsibility law. And it was passed in 2014. So if any of you have purchased paint in Colorado since then, you have paid a small fee at the time of purchase. That fee then funds the program run by Paint Care, which is the stewardship organization formed by producers of architectural paint that works with retailers, local governments, and other groups to collect unused paint across Colorado. They also are in other states as well. So this particular program, like I said, is mostly funded through that point of sale fee, but the producers have also come together to operate the program. They donate staff time and some other in-kind costs to make the program work. This law requires that the program provide convenient collections so that at least 95% of Colorado residents have a permanent collection facility within a 15-mile radius of home, and that they must also have additional permanent collection sites per every 30,000 residents. So if you've got a very densely populated municipality or the metro area has a lot more sites in it that will collect. They have yearly events in area, and they have to have yearly events in areas that don't have collection sites. Next slide. As you can see, the Paint Care program has been very successful at responsibly collecting unused paint. As of 2024, the program operates in 10 states and DC, and there are 2 more states being added. In Colorado, Paint Care has saved local governments money from improperly disposed paint that might otherwise have been dumped down drains or dumped into, into the curb in the sewer. And it also covers the local government's costs for their collection. So if you have a household hazardous waste facility that's collecting paint, for example. The program has collected over 7 million gallons of paint since 2015. And in 2003 alone, the program collected over 800,000 gallons of paint, much of which was recycled or reused. So reuse in this case is if someone drops off a gallon that looks pretty new, they can leave it on, at their local HHW, household hazardous waste facility, or they can take it into a participating paint store. And that mostly new looking can of paint might go to a reuse store, such as like a Habitat Restore, or be resold out of the household hazardous waste building. So that's what they mean by reuse, or it can also be recycled. They collect paint through 205 year-round drop-off sites. So again, those retailers as well as household hazardous waste, and over 65 events. Like I said, if you have specific questions about Paint Care, please put them in the Q&A, and we will have our friends from Paint Care answer those at the end. So next slide. All right, so now we're getting into the packaging law. But before we really dive into the producer responsibility for packaging law, I want to set the stage with a little background on why we needed to have such a transformative law that would lead to a systematic shift in recycling programs. For years, Colorado's diversion rate, which is the amount of material that we recycle or compost rather than landfill, has hovered around 15%. That's less than half the national average. The largest barrier to recycling in Colorado is a lack of access to recycling services. That's, as I mentioned before, that's because most of Colorado residents have to subscribe to and pay for recycling services. Very few communities guarantee recycling access, through municipal contracts or municipally run recycling services. Next slide. So in 2022, Colorado became the third US state to adopt producer responsibility for recycling packaging and printed paper. That part's important. Some states, well, but we have printed paper in ours as well as packaging. Just leave it there. There are now 5 states with similar laws. The states that have producer responsibility for packaging include Maine was the first, then Oregon, Colorado, California, and just last year, Minnesota. And there are other states that are doing needs assessments, hoping that their needs assessments will lead to a producer responsibility law. And then there's others that are currently hearing bills on producer responsibility for packaging. So in Colorado's law, all consumer-facing packaging must pay into the program. So consumer-facing packaging are recyclable items like bottles, cans, containers, boxes, and mailers, as well as non-recyclable items like the pouches where you might get like nuts or dog treats or something in. The law also covers printed paper, so magazines and junk mail, and food service packaging. And one of the biggest benefits of this program is that it will create a statewide list of recyclable materials. This means that whether you're in Louisville or La Junta, you will know what items can go into your recycling and that those items will be recycled. So that's one of the big exciting things, is that they are creating this list that makes it very clear what can be recycled anywhere in the state. The funding for this program is 100% producer funded, and that is unique to Colorado. The other states so far that have passed producer responsibility for packaging have at least some split where the state or local governments are still paying for some portion of the recycling. Here in Colorado, producers are going to pay the full cost. Producers pay based on the type and amount of packaging they put into the market, and cost is just fractions of a penny per package, with lower fees for easier to recycle packaging in an effort to drive that better design. So producers of all materials have to pay in regardless of the recyclability of their packaging. While the program is designed to collect only the materials that are genuinely recyclable, producers must pay into the system for all of their packaging. So while the things that are going to be on that list in Louisville or La Junta, it's going to be the cans and bottles, the things that we can recycle, but producers still have to pay in even if their materials are not recyclable, if their packaging is not material. Or is not, yeah. So a producer of a beverage can and a recyclable aluminum can would pay a much lower amount than a producer of, say, a chip can with a metal bottom, plastic lined cardboard sides that can't be recycled. The producer responsibility organization is going to reimburse 100% of recycling costs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The collection requirements for this program are that recycling must be, like, quote, the law, as convenient as trash. So that means in areas with curbside trash service, there will be curbside recycling. And in areas that only have drop-offs for trash, they will have a drop-off for recycling, likely at the same landfill or transfer station where their trash goes. The stewardship organizations, this gets to one of the questions that was asked earlier. There is one main producer responsibility organization called Circular Action Alliance, often called CAA. So if I use that acronym, that's who I'm referring to. CAA is the nonprofit with members from major consumer brand companies like Pepsi, Coke, Walmart, and others. The CAA is responsible for the majority of the implementation of this program, which includes rolling out curbside recycling and drop-off sites throughout the state. There has been a second program plan submitted by the Lubricants Packaging Management Association, or LPMA. The reason they submitted a separate plan is because their packaging is things like petroleum and automotive products that really shouldn't be mixed in to curbside recycling. The material, the product that's inside of their packaging, if their packaging was clean, hadn't yet been filled, it would be recyclable like many others. But because it has had this automotive lubricants inside of it, it really should not go back into the curbside recycling stream. And so they have submitted their own separate plan to be able to collect their materials at their own retailers' facilities and at household hazardous waste facilities, so they can still collect and responsibly manage the end of life of their packages. It just won't go through, and appropriately should not go through, the same system as CAA and things like soda bottles. Next slide. I guess one last thing on that, so to answer the question very directly, producers must join a producer responsibility organization. They cannot sell products into the state if they have not joined a producer responsibility organization or submitted a producer responsibility, an individual plan like LPMA did, even though they're still a group of producers. You must do one or the other, or you're in violation of the law. And that's where CDPHE or the Department of Public Health and Environment will be monitoring compliance. So it is a long and complicated process for a bill to go from development to passage to implementation, particularly a bill of this size with and this complexity. On the plus side, each of the steps that go into the process has been an opportunity for EcoCycle and our local government and environmental non-government organization partners, as well as many of you eco leaders, to influence and provide input into the steps that help shape the process into a better outcome. So the bill passed, as I mentioned, in 2022. In 2023, the state appointed the advisory board and selected Circular Action Alliance as the main PRO. That fall, CAA started a statewide needs assessment, which looked at the gaps and what recycling infrastructure and programs we had, and where the gaps were and what needed to be filled. The findings of that needs assessment were presented to the Department of Public Health and Environment, who then presented it to the Legislative Joint Budget Committee in early 2024. And I believe I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. After the Joint Budget Committee approved the findings of the needs assessment, which included goals for the program, CAA started drafting and implementing the plan over the summer and then last fall. That plan was submitted to CDPHE and the advisory board just this month, February 1st. And so the advisory board right now is reviewing it and will give their findings to CDPHE. Over the summer, CAA, oh my gosh, so many acronyms, I'm sorry. Circular Action Alliance will review or update the plan based on what CDPHE and the advisory board have asked them to do. And then late summer or early fall, groups like EcoCycle and municipalities and you all, individuals, will be able to weigh in with public comment. So the hope is that the plan will be finalized in December so that implementation can begin in 2026. So one of the questions was who's furthest along? That's where we are right now. Oregon's final plan was just approved, but I believe their implementation date is later than ours. So we all just have these different dates, and it's hard to say who's further ahead. The very cool thing about having so many states, not so many, but a number of states that are moving forward with this, and all of them have Circular Action Alliance as their producer responsibility organization. We are all able to have things specific to our state, but there's also harmonization between the states, so that makes it easier for the producers to comply with the laws, and it will hopefully make it easier to roll out the laws as well. So there's individualization, but also harmonization between the different states. Next slide. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to dig into a few program details. So as I mentioned, the producer responsibility is required to pay for 100% of the cost of recycling. So this means that they will cover the cost of collection and transportation to material recovery facilities like the Boulder County Recycling Center. They will also pay for the processing of those materials at the MRFs. They'll cover the cost of education and outreach. And since they're required to build on existing recycling education programs in the state, this will likely mean that they will contract with local governments and groups like EcoCycle and other NGOs around the state to do that community engagement and education. Finally, the PRO is required to pay for necessary infrastructure investments to build out needed recycling infrastructure around the state. So as I mentioned before, there are places in our state like Boulder County that have pretty advanced recycling, but there's also a lot of our state that does not have that infrastructure that's needed. Some of it, there's some exciting things in the work where we might see some infrastructure being built out in the next couple of years, and hopefully investments from CAA will help spur on those investments and the infrastructure build out. Next slide, please. So the law requires the program to provide recycling access to all Coloradans. It will start by providing recycling service to both to residents in both single-family homes and to multifamily homes, and will add service to some non-residential entities like schools and governments starting in 2028. There will be no cost for recycling to residents. So residents who currently pay for recycling will have that portion of their bill covered by the program. They'll still continue to pay for their own trash, and if they have compost services, they'll pay for the trash and compost. But the portion of the bill that would have covered recycling, the producer responsibility organization will be paying for that cost. Residents who currently don't have recycling will receive the option to have recycling at no cost. Residents will still, like I said, they'll still have to pay for their trash and composting, and no residents have to recycle. They will have the opportunity, but they can choose whether or not they participate in the recycling program. Next slide. So the PRO will not be the entity providing the collection or the recycling service. They're required by law to build on existing programs and infrastructure. As we talked about earlier, they will contract with service providers in the state to provide the actual recycling collection and processing. There's also just like there's no requirement for individual residents to actually recycle, there's no requirement for local governments or businesses to offer recycling services if they choose not to. So the PRO has to figure out how to fill those holes, and hopefully they will be offering reimbursement rates that make it attractive enough to service providers that they will choose to opt into the program, but they do not have to. Next slide, please. So while our law's main intent is to create systems for recycling, it does also include goals for reusable packaging, which will ultimately reduce overall packaging. Reuse is one of the points of policy evolution that I talked about earlier when I said how we look at other jurisdictions and work on ways to make laws better with different iterations. When we wrote the language for the Colorado law, we exempted reusable packaging from having to pay into the system, thinking that by exempting it, that would incentivize reuse. Unfortunately, by exempting it, we also then lose the ability to collect data around reusable packaging, and there's some other unintended consequences that we're now seeing. Right after our law passed, I was invited to participate in a couple national working groups looking at best practices for reuse in producer responsibility. And through those groups' discussions, we recognize that even reusable containers, they will eventually have to be disposed, and there's a cost to that disposal. So from our discussions, we arrived at a better way to incentivize reusables, but still fund the eventual end of life for those products, which is to charge for a product's first entry onto a market, but charge a highly reduced rate or no charge at all for subsequent entries into the market. So in other words, the first time a reusable bottle is put onto the market, the producer pays into the system, just like they would with any single-use package. But then every time that bottle is returned for refill, the producer pays a reduced cost or none at all. And of course, there's details to work out about how you track that and manage that, but that's kind of the intent to get more reuse out of the system. So while this adapted thinking didn't impact our law since it had already been passed, another thing that came out of those discussions was better, more precise definitions for reuse and refill, which can clarify that the difference between reuse and refill. So reuse would be within a system where producers are actually doing the reuse. So if you think of old-fashioned soda bottles, or that they actually were returned as bottles, they were cleaned, they were refilled, they were put back on the market. I shouldn't say old-fashioned because we want that now too. Whereas refill is more something that a customer does themselves. You might get a tablet that's a concentrate that you refill your bathroom cleaner bottle with by adding water. So those clarified definitions we were able to take into the implementation of Colorado's law through rulemaking. It's not in the law, but it's in the rules that the Department of Public Health and Environment will use to help implement the program. So I got off script, Rosie, but I'm done with that slide. If you'll move forward, please. So the first major task that the PRO had to complete was that statewide needs assessment, looking at the existing and needed recycling infrastructure, programs, education programs, as well as potential for shifting single-use packaging to reuse, and the impact of compostable packaging on compost facilities. Compostable packaging is a very small portion of our law. We wanted to ensure that any producer switching to compostable or using compostable packaging was paying into the program, and that composters that do opt to take compostable packaging receive some financial benefit, particularly to clean contamination out of their streams. It will not cover the cost of like compost pickup using compostables, but it is an important piece of our law. The assessment relied on hundreds of interviews and surveys that the stakeholder group engagements. The CAA did tours of facilities and also had the regular consultations with the advisory board and CDPHE throughout the process of creating the needs assessment. The resulting draft plan was submitted to CDPHE in January of last year, suggesting 3 potential scenarios that that CAA could move forward with to comply with the law. And those 3 scenarios were actually built into the law, that they had to come up with 3 different scenarios. The scenarios presented low, medium, and high investments that would garner respectively low, medium, and high improvements to the rate of packages recycled in Colorado by 2035. CDPHE solicited public feedback on the needs assessment scenarios, at which time EcoCycle and 10 of our Colorado environmental nonprofit partners recommended that the state approve a modification of the medium scenario that was being presented. We liked some of the investments that were being made over the lowest scenario, whereas we thought the highest scenario was making some allowances for some materials that we didn't feel like should be part of the plan. So we really liked the medium scenario with some adjustments. CDPHE reviewed our letter and actually presented the medium scenario, the modified medium scenario that we had suggested or advocated for, to the legislature's Joint Budget Committee for approval. And in April, the Joint Budget Committee greenlighted that scenario, which allowed CAA to move forward to the step they are now of developing the plan. So the modified medium scenario will expand recycling services to approximately 700,000 additional Colorado households. That's in addition to those that already have recycling. By 2035, it will increase recycling tons, an additional 410,000 tons of valuable recyclable material, for a total of 720,000 tons, or an annual recycling rate of 60% for packaging materials. So this is just the rate of packaging. It'll add an additional 7,900 recycling related jobs. Those won't all be in Colorado, but they will be additional jobs thanks to recycling. And it will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions equivalent of removing annually removing 278,000 cars from the road. CDPHE also calculated that it will save municipalities and residents millions of dollars each year, estimating that Denver alone will save $16.3 million annually. So it's a pretty impressive goals that they have. Next slide, please. So the program plan, which the advisory board is reviewing right now, it's a high-level look at how the program will be implemented. It includes the minimum recyclables list, which I mentioned. That's that list that's going to say anywhere in the state these materials can be recycled, as well as a list of what materials have to pay into the program, and another smaller list of materials that could possibly be recycled if some adjustments were made to the system, if adjustments were made to that packaging. So it's materials that producers hope to get on the recyclables list, and that we are definitely watching and trying to see what the steps are with those. The plan also includes goals around minimum recycled content requirements and how to expand reuse. It includes formulas and processes for how the pro will engage with and pay service providers, including recycling haulers, processors, and educators. And it also includes a mechanism to calculate the producer dues, so how they will know how much they have to pay into the system. This is the first draft that's being reviewed. And as I mentioned, the draft will be updated by the advisory board and CDPHE, and will provide public comment starting in late summer or early fall. Let's see, the next slide starts going into batteries. Looking at time, are there questions about this one, or Rosie, do you want me just to go through the battery bill and then we can take all the questions later?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide. There's so many good questions that I kind of want to the battery section is shorter than what we've just covered. So I kind of want to power through and then do all the questions.
Okay, that sounds good. And I'm realizing that we took out the slide on cost. So I want to answer that question for sure. So I did mention that the cost per package has been shown. Remember that these programs have been in place since the early 90s. And in all those decades, the cost per package is fractions of a penny. And there have been multiple studies that have shown that there is no evidence that compliance with a producer responsibility system for recycling increases the price of the products. You think of all the things that impact the price, the labor, fuel to transport materials, the supply chain. There's so many things that go into that price point that compliance with these laws really does not impact the cost of consumer goods. So that is the answer on the cost, and they're hopefully sorry, I'm off script again. But yeah, there's no impact on cost of consumer goods. We can roll into batteries. Thanks. So the bill that's at the legislature right now, and we wrote this slide earlier in the week, the exciting update is that this bill made it through its first hearing yesterday. So it is on its way, and it will create a collection and recycling system for small and medium format batteries. So the legislative sponsors are Senator Lisa Coder, and Senator Matt Ball. Actually, that was added and is not on the slide. That was a new development, as well as Representatives Rebecca Stewart and Kyle Brown. So Recycle Colorado, which is a statewide membership organization of entities that are interested in improving recycling, and EcoCycle is a very active member of Recycle Colorado, is partnering with the Rocky Mountain chapter of the National Waste and Recycling Association to champion this bill, along with a coalition of firefighters, local governments, and the battery industry. As I mentioned earlier, the battery industry is actually working on about 20 of these bills nationwide. So it's a very popular bill to be moving through the systems right now. Our coalition based our language on a bill that was adopted by Illinois last year, and we've made some modifications to it that help make it meet the specific needs of Colorado, such as the funding mechanism. We worked out some adjustments to make sure that it meets our needs. Like producer responsibility for packaging, This program is going to be 100% producer funded. The collection standards are actually modeled exactly on the paint care program, requiring permanent facilities and events to provide the collection access to all Coloradans. There's obviously not yet a PRO since it's still in bill form and hasn't been adopted, but there is a battery steward, at least one battery stewardship organization. I believe there's actually a couple that are operating both already in Colorado and nationwide. So I mentioned that this is for small and medium format batteries. So this is everything from your button batteries to like e-bikes and some lawn equipment. And it's anything that is loose. So anything that can be taken out of a device using nothing more than a common household tool. So that's everything that's covered in the bill. The bill also has an assessment of embedded batteries. So batteries that cannot be removed using a common household tool. So things like your cell phone, your laptop, light up shoes, the greeting cards that have batteries and speakers in them. The reason that these aren't in the bill, even though some of these embedded batteries are some of the most problematic batteries because they're real fire hazard, they're not covered under the bill because there really aren't good solutions for collection systems for these batteries. You think about all the products I just mentioned, they all look very different. And so they're just are not yet systems to collect them, but there will be assessments. Actually, the state of Washington is already working on an assessment. The Producer Responsibility Organization is already starting an assessment in Illinois. So our bill allows for a producer responsibility organization to use those other assessments so that we don't have to be delayed in getting the results for ours, but we'll be able to benefit from the states that have gone before us. Another thing that's not covered in our bill is EV batteries, so electric vehicle batteries. The reason for that is that if you think about both the size of the batteries compared to consumer-facing batteries, as well as where they end up. You know, when I pop a battery out of my remote control, I have it in my hand, I have to figure out what to do with it. If my EV needs a new battery, I'm going to take it to the auto dealer and they're going to take it out and they're going to have to figure out what to do with it. So the collection systems and who's responsible and can be responsible for getting those batteries responsibly recycled are very different. And so I believe all of the laws that focus on batteries either focus on EV batteries like the state of New Jersey's, or they focus on the small and medium format batteries. And the majority of the laws that are either being run currently or have been adopted are focused on these small and medium format batteries. Next slide, please. So why do we need this bill now? Batteries are in the news a lot, and there's a number of reasons. Batteries that are thrown in the trash and curbside recycling pose serious fire risks. That is the biggest reason, or that between that and the amount of very valuable material that we really should be recycling, those are probably the two biggest reasons that we need to more responsibly collect and recycle batteries. We know that improperly disposed batteries, in addition to being fire hazards, can also leak toxic materials into the land and soil. Collection and access in Colorado, in particular, in a lot of states, but in particular in Colorado, is very limited, very inconvenient, and costly for both residents and local governments. So in Colorado, the majority of places to take batteries, there's some retail take back. I'll get to that in a minute. But the majority are household hazardous waste facilities. We have between 8 and 10 household hazardous waste facilities throughout our state. That's 8 to 10 counties out of our 64 counties that have one facility. So very limited collections. And the cost to local governments has actually tripled in the last year to cover the collection of batteries. So having a producer-funded system is really important. And of course, batteries contain valuable materials that can be recovered and used to make new products. We don't have super reliable data, but the best estimates that we could do working with our friends at the Boulder County Household Hazardous Waste Facility is that about 5% of small and medium format batteries are currently collected and recycled. That's a lot of batteries going into the trash or being mistakenly thrown into recycling. Next slide, please. And this is what happens far too often when batteries are thrown into the recycling. It's the importance of creating a safe system for collecting and recycling batteries. When batteries are improperly disposed in the trash or in recycling streams, they can cause fires. The recycling industry has seen a 41% increase in battery fires in the last 5 years. So at the Boulder County Recycling Center, we've had 13 fires since 2020, and 10 of those were caused by batteries. And we hear a lot about lithium-ion batteries causing fires, and they do pose the highest fire risk, but other batteries can also cause fires. Just because they don't have enough energy left in them to power the device we need powered, they still might have enough charge to cause a fire, especially if they're mixed in with things like paper. Right now, the best way to safely dispose of batteries is to take them to places like the CHARM or Household Hazardous Waste Facility if you're in Boulder County. Some retail locations like hardware stores or Staples participate in voluntary take-back programs. And you can find the take-back programs on the Call to Recycle website. So Rosie's going to put that in the chat. Oh, she already did. Good job. Next slide, please. So in addition to setting up collection systems for batteries, the law has a lot of safety requirements in it. And these safety requirements have been copied from other states, and we actually increased a few of them in the Colorado draft legislation. The law has specific requirements to ensure proper safety at participating collection sites and processing sites and events. They all must comply with applicable state, local, and federal safety regulations for handling and transporting batteries. The Battery Stewardship Organization is allowed to kick out any collection site or collection event host if that site or host are not complying with safety criteria, which is really important to the battery stewardship organizations that we've been talking to as we've written this bill. The Battery Stewardship Organization must also provide appropriate containers to collect and store the batteries in, and then they are responsible for arranging safe transportation of the batteries in a manner that conforms to all Department of Transportation regulations for transporting these types of materials. The Battery Stewardship Organization must also provide training and training materials to collection site staff for handling batteries, including information on how to handle damaged and defective batteries, because damaged and defective batteries are really the ones that pose the largest fire risk. And then a clause that we've actually added to the Colorado bill is that the Battery Stewardship Organization must also provide safety training to firefighters and first responders so that they know how to better address battery fires. Next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide, please, Rosie? Thanks. So I've already touched on this a little bit, but there are a few different pathways for collecting and recycling batteries right now. Batteries can happen at, battery take-back can happen at through voluntary retail take-back, like I mentioned, hardware stores and some office supply stores. Drop-off sites like EcoCycle Center for hard to recycle materials or household hazardous waste facilities. Collection events which are often hosted by local governments, often in conjunction with e-waste collection. And also there's some curbside collection programs through businesses like Ridwell or other at your door recycling businesses. So this bill is required to build on these existing collection programs, the ones that meet the safety standards. And then also, sorry, it means to imply that any of them don't meet the safety standards. But the producer responsibility organization is required to build on the existing collection programs. It will cover the cost of the collection barrel that I mentioned, as well as the transportation to the recycling processor. And they will also cover the cost of labor, storage, and educational activities that local governments and sites that the local governments designate as collection facilities in their areas incur as part of the program. And just like the packaging program, no local government or retailer or waste or recycling business will be required to collect batteries. They can all opt into the program. And I believe next slide, my last slide here. Producer stewardship for battery recovery and recycling is going to benefit Colorado by reducing the risk of pollution and fire due to improperly disposed batteries, providing a battery recovery access to all Coloradans. Again, requirement to have facilities for Coloradans to collection of batteries for all Coloradans within 95% of Coloradans within 15 miles of their homes, and then additional requirements for events for folks that don't have collection facilities within 15 miles of their homes. It will reduce consumer confusion about battery recovery and recycling through statewide robust education efforts. It'll shift the cost of battery recovery and recycling from residents and local governments to battery producers. Again, unlike the packaging law, when I've asked national experts on producer responsibility if there's any evidence of increased price of batteries for compliance with producer responsibility laws, I was told that there has not been, and there's been 20 odd years of battery producer responsibility in some states. And finally, it's going to increase the recovery of critical materials that we can take back into the supply chain to make new batteries. Rosie, I will hand it back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of that, Rachel. That was so great to go in depth with you. And I will, just talk for a second before we turn it back over to you for questions. But so now that we know so much more about this issue, and there's still so much kind of to digest, and maybe we'll review and we get the slides and the recording later. But I just want to talk about how you can be part of it now, how you can be involved in what you can go do with this information now. So it's so beautiful when there is like a really direct call to action from the issues that we've just gone over. And in this case, Rachel just finished talking about our battery stewardship bill. And you can come lobby with us next week for this bill, which is just about the most hands-on thing I can offer you. So we're having our lobby day with Recycle Colorado, and this is the little agenda. But essentially, we hear a lot about lobbying power. We hear a lot about industries lobbying. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and a lot of that is probably making us feel a little anxious, a little politically powerless. There's a lot of feelings that are being pent up if you're an environmentalist right now. And this is just a great way to like show up, go to the Capitol, get involved with the democratic process directly, and talk to some of these legislators about this issue. And so even if this is a great way to get involved specifically with this bill that we've been learning about, but just in general, it's a great way to get your feet wet and like feel empowered directly to engage with, decision makers that affect us all every day as Coloradans. So that's on Tuesday. I will send all of the information out in a follow-up email. And then just some additional next steps. So kind of all of a lot of the resources that we've talked about and any of the action items that I'm saying right now, I'll just send a big follow-up email with a big list of things you can do, more things you can read, things you can look into. Again, we'll see you at Lobby Day. You can, if you're not already, I know a lot of you are, but if you're not already an eco leader, that's a great way, a great next step to get signed up and really to get trained on the guidelines and what goes where and how to talk about these things and other ways to get involved. You can also sign up to be on the policy action team. So you can do this. It's primarily for eco leaders, but if you don't have time to get trained as an eco leader and you just want to be on the policy action team, you can do that too. That just means that whenever we have Like all of these things move really quickly through the legislature, and we have all of these like things changing and needing support and needing, communications to your representative. And so if you sign up for the policy action team, that just means that we have a group of like, out of all of our supporters, these are the ones who are really looking to get involved with policy and who are really interested in updates there. So it just means that you'll get a more direct line to these policy updates. You can also get involved with some other zero waste policies here in Colorado. So the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act was one of our huge recent bills that is now being rolled out. I'm sure most of you have seen it in the grocery stores, but there are still some ways to get involved there to help restaurants, for example, get weaned off of polystyrene and know their alternative options there. Same thing with our Truth and Compostables labeling bill. You can essentially be a little tattler to the state to let them know which brands need support on labeling. And then the landfill methane emission rulemaking is also happening still for a few more days in the month of February. So CDPHE, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that Rachel talked about, is also looking at the impact of landfills on Coloradans, so specifically because of their methane emissions. And so I think Vara, someone in the, Vara in the Q&A was saying that they live really close to a landfill. So this is, I'm going to email you separately, but if anyone lives near a landfill or just wants to give feedback to CDPHE about what that experience is like, and give some feedback about how we as a state could cut back on landfill methane emissions, that's another great way to get involved. And then as Rachel just mentioned, as she was going through, there will be more opportunities to get involved with both the packaging producer responsibility bill and this battery stewardship bill. So just stay tuned. Again, a great way to do that is to sign up for the policy action team. But there's so many steps to this, as we've seen, and there will be more opportunities for us to give feedback as Coloradans. So again, the good news is there are plenty of ways for us to get involved. And I think there was a question very early on about the impact of the big changes at the federal level and how that impacts us. So what I've been saying is kind of like, yeah, it is big and it's everybody's feeling the ripples kind of in environmental work, but this is such a great opportunity for us to really focus on taking action at the state level, reaching out to our communities, taking local action for the environment. And it's really exciting to live here in Colorado where we have these great zero waste bills happening. So with that, I'll just go to our little contact page here. And again, I'll send these slides out. But it is time, it's time to do questions now. So we have plenty of questions. We have 15 minutes. I know we're not going to get through all of them. So I will take note of all of these and we'll try to answer any that we don't really, that we don't get to touch on. But I'm just going to try to pull out some themes so we can start talking about them maybe as a group. Yeah, Rachel.
I just want to answer, I touched on this, but I don't think I went in depth enough. So in the packaging law, there's a couple questions about shouldn't we be encouraging producers to do better packaging, and absolutely. The base fees, like I mentioned, if you have recyclable materials, you're going to be paying less into the system than if you have polystyrene or mixed material that's hard or impossible to recycle. But in addition to those base fees, there's what's called eco-modulated fees. So what this means is additional fees that are either tacked on or bonuses that you get as a producer for doing things that are either bad or good. If you are, and those eco-modulated fees, they're being worked out right now for the Colorado plan in France. Actually, France is the leader in eco-modulated fees. They created the idea because their producer responsibility for packaging law, they weren't really seeing much change in the packaging. And so they added on what they call bonuses and malices that can double the cost of materials or really, really reduce them significantly if they meet certain criteria. Like one thing that I remember was glass bottles that have non-glass beads in them, because that just messes up the system and creates a contaminant. If they use certain types of plastics, I can't think of the other, they have a number of different bonus or malus structures to really drive specific changes in the packaging. And again, there's the reuse piece that some of the other states have been able to do in a slightly better way than we have, and really requiring more investment into reuse. So there are definitely incentives within the programs to reduce packaging. You're muted.
Classic. Okay, so thank you for going through that. Yeah, that's a big theme here. We have some questions about specifically, so like things like number one clamshells that maybe some MRFs are having trouble finding markets for, or you know, plastic, just like film and pouches and things that just like we're not going to build a recycling market for them tomorrow. Can you talk a little bit more about, as we're creating these lists of this is what's recyclable, so this is how much it costs, this is not, how things that are just like reducing plastic rather than only talking about recycling versus non are playing in?
I feel like there's a couple different questions in there. So the question about, my MRF can take this and my MRF can't take this. Once this producer responsibility system has implemented the statewide recycling list, it's on the producer responsibility organization to make sure that the materials can be collected and recycled. So a lot of why MRFs, particularly those in, or recycling systems, particularly those in more rural areas, can't take some of the materials that maybe some in an urban area can, is because they have that much further to drive that material. And so every mile that you have to drive the material to get it to a market, that adds expense. And so if the value of that material for recycling is not very high to begin with, the idea of driving it across the mountains, over passes, and to a recycling, to a MRF in the metro area, and then on to a mill to process it, it becomes economically not feasible. And so with this statewide coordinated program, the producers are going to be funding that expense. And so they're going to be leveling out the playing fields, whether you have a collection facility way out in the mountains or one that's right near a MRF in the metro area. So that'll help even that out. Rosie, what was the other part of the question?
Yeah, so sorry. So there's, I'm just trying to group them together. So this question says, so will numbers on plastic items then be eliminated and all plastic sold will be recyclable? Another question is, what do we do about these films and things that just are not recyclable? So just to clarify, it's not that we're saying every piece of plastic sold in the state of Colorado has to be recycled. It's saying, or recyclable, it's saying these are the ones that we agree as a state are, and we'll support the recyclability of that item. And these are the things that are not, and you're charged according to that rather than saying everything has to be.
Yeah. I laugh because that is the ongoing battle, right? And the California producer responsibility law has very, very steep goals for plastics and around plastics, to the point that some folks don't know that if their goals are going to be achievable. I would love to see them be achieved. And of course, what happens in places like California with such huge market share, that could positively impact us here. But like Rosie said, every piece of packaging has to be, producers have to pay into the system here. But if it's a resin that just really isn't recyclable, or a mixed resin, it's not recyclable, and it still won't be collected, and it will not be sent on. There is a requirement in the producer responsibility law, in I believe all of them that have been passed in the US, that the materials have to go to a responsible end market. And there's different criteria in the different states what that means to be a responsible end market. But really what that's trying to do is to ensure that the materials get to a MRF and then go somewhere where they will be responsibly recycled, and not just, oh, we collected them, we don't know what to do with them, we're just going to landfill them. We're trying to absolutely make sure that there's not loopholes like that. So that is another safeguard in these types of laws.
Right. And the idea is that if these materials are ending up on the no list, that they'll then be incentivized to rethink, redesign. Great. Okay, we have a lot of questions. My next group of questions is, how is this going to affect certain folks? So I know this is multiple, Rachel, but I'm just going to list. So folks in an unincorporated area, folks in HOAs and multifamily complexes, how is that defined? And then we got school districts and hospitals and medical facilities.
Okay, So in unincorporated areas, the better question is whether it's unincorporated and very rural or unincorporated and very urban. All Coloradans will get access to recycling. It's going to be faster for the program to be able to roll out in areas that already have recycling services. So in cities like Boulder, Louisville, Lafayette, that either have a contract or have an ordinance in place, or in Longmont, where the municipality actually runs their own trucks, it's going to be pretty easy for the producer responsibility organization to come in and just pay for that portion of the recycling. In communities like, say, Lakewood, there's not an organized system, but there are haulers that are available. People can get recycling if they want to. That's going to be the next easiest type of municipality probably to work in. As you work further and further away from current access to recycling, it's going to take longer to build up the capacity to hire truck drivers, to buy trucks. Not that the PRO is going to be doing that, but the haulers that are in this operating in the state, they're going to have to build up their labor force and their trucks and reach out to those customers. So it'll be rolled out over the next few years. So that's the urban rural divide. HOAs, same kind of thing. A lot of HOAs have contracts already, so it'll be pretty easy for the producer responsibility organization to come in and pay that portion of the bill. If you're in an HOA that doesn't guarantee recycling, you're going to be in the same boat as a municipality that I just described. School districts, by 2028, the producer responsibility organization is required to start offering recycling services to some some non-residential entities. And they have identified schools and local governments as probably some of the first that they will start offering services to. So like in Boulder Valley, where we have recycling at our schools, that's not true for all school districts. And so that they will, the producer responsibility organization will be required to figure out how to get recycling services to those entities. As far as other businesses like hospitals and things, not all commercial recycling is written into the law. You know, ideally, maybe in 2040, 2045, maybe we'll be at a point that we can have recycling for everybody. That'd be awesome. But that's not written into the law as it is. The producer responsibility organization is required every 5 years to do another needs assessment in addition to their annual reporting. And so if they're not meeting their goals, or if the goals can be increased because they have met them, things will adjust over time.
Great. Okay, thank you. The next group, I see we have 6 minutes left. So again, if we have some unanswered questions, we'll get them answered for you in the follow-up email. But so I have 2 questions here about kind of the enforcement and how that is different from monitoring compliance. So somebody was saying like there's, so for CDPHE, will it or another org also be the enforcer? That's different from just monitoring compliance. And then someone else, Ted said, his question is about the fact that CAA is made up of essentially the producers themselves. So what's to stop them from having a conflict of interest in this position?
So CDPHE, now you're really testing. I haven't read the bill in a long time. CDPHE, it is their role to make sure that the producer responsibility organization is in compliance. The producer responsibility organization is the first line of compliance enforcement for producers. You know, it's in their best interest to get all the producers paying in. If you have a producer that is a free rider, as folks are calling anyone that doesn't pay into the system, they're trying to put their packaging on the market, but they're not paying in. That hurts the ones that are paying in because they are paying for the system that's collecting them. So it is really within the best interest of the producer responsibility organization to be getting the producers in compliance. And when you think about the producers that are the largest producers putting the most packaging on the market, most, if not all of them, are participating in producer responsibility organizations in Canada. Most of the provinces in Canada have EPR for packaging. They're in the EU. They're all over the place. So this is not a new concept to these producers, and they want to make sure that the other ones are also paying in. So there's that level there. There are a number of safeguards written into the law to hopefully make sure that folks are on the up and up. I will say, just anecdotally, all of the folks that I've interacted with from CAA have been genuinely interested in making a program that works. So it's been a very positive process thus far. Any others, Rose?
Let's see. Okay, sorry, the same person is saying, I'm still not clear about how CDPHE or another agency will be enforcing and how beyond incentives and disincentives.
Might have to take that one offline because I'm not
Fair
sure
enough.
how more to answer that one.
Yeah. Okay, just really quick. C&D, construction and demolition is not included.
Correct.
Okay. We have 3 minutes. Let's see. Oh, did you, sorry if I missed this. Did you talk about HOAs and MFCs specifically?
Multifamily
Okay, great.
complexes, I did not mention that one, but yeah, that will be in the first rollout, is that the producer responsibility organization, when they roll it out to single family, they will also be rolling recycling to multifamily or apartments, condos.
Okay. I do want to do Michael's question because somebody else sent me that as well directly. So if someone currently doesn't have a trash service, what will that look like with universal rollout? Like they will be signed up for the services and then they can opt out if they want.
So if you didn't have trash service, that's an interesting question. If you're in an area that generally does have trash service and you are just choosing not to, I would guess that you're gonna have recycling service. If you're in an area where people just don't have curbside and everyone takes their materials to a transfer station or a dump, a landfill, you're likely the drop-off site for recycling in that area is going to be at that transfer station or that landfill.
Okay, great. I think that was another question about unincorporated. Would China, Vietnam, other markets outside of the US be considered legit when you were talking about those legitimate markets?
I don't know that they have been specifically written out of them. The criteria for the responsible end markets, particularly the criteria for the Oregon law, they've got very specific criteria in theirs, which make a pretty high bar for recycling end markets. And believe theirs requires some auditing of their end markets. So I'm not going to say that materials can't go there, but there will definitely be investigation of what's happening with the materials.
Okay, amazing. So I saw that we had 2 paint questions and Sonia answered them in the chat. So thank you so much, Sonia. I'll capture the chat and the Q&A. So I'll send that out so folks can have that. Oh, what was my last one? Oh no, I had such a good one to end on and now I can't find it. Oh, it wasn't that good. I mean, it's a good question, but can you just mention like Amazon online sellers? I know that you did talk about this, but just reiterate how that fits in.
Yeah, so an online seller is going to be the same as an in-store seller. If you are a producer, a brand owner, and you're meeting that threshold of minimum packaging, you will have to pay into the system.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, folks are worried that Amazon's getting off easy. They're not. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for all of these questions. They were so many and so good. Yeah, if you're looking to take action tomorrow, I know there's some anti-consumerism buy nothing movements going on. We will send yeah, all of these things as soon as we can, including the recording and the slides. But please reach out to us with any other questions and comments, ideas. We will be in touch. Thank you so much for joining us on your Thursday night. I hope you all go have some yummy food, take a good rest. Rachel, I appreciate you so much. This was such, I always learn so much from you, and I made you talk for so long. So I will let you all go. Again, I'll email you, so please feel free to connect with us directly. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.